Hi guys, welcome back to SwitchUp. I'm Mark Walker, and today we're going to look at Chronos Before the Ashes, which released back in 2016, but we saw it release on the Nintendo Switch in 2020. It has some really interesting mechanics that I think make the Souls-like perhaps a little bit more appealing for newer players, or those that find them perhaps a tad unapproachable. It has many similarities to one of my favourites, Demon's Souls. It's been jointly developed by THQ Nordic and Gunfire Games to bring it over to the Nintendo Switch. Thanks to those guys for the review copy. Is it a Demon's Soul or a derpy soul? Let's find out. The story centres around one main protagonist as he goes about trying to save his home kingdom. His main aim is to slay a dragon, but it's a little bit more complex than that. It's split between two universes divided by time and accessible through travel crystals, and your adventure will begin washed up on the shores of a modern day facility. Not entirely sure exactly what's going on, but reading snippets of computer screens and small handwritten notes to try and establish exactly what's taken place. You'll soon travel back to the medieval style homeland of the main character, and it's from here that the vast majority of your adventure takes place. Storytelling is very akin to other Souls-likes, with characters of few words and much of the exposition being entirely optional through the aforementioned handwritten notes. In terms of gameplay and controls, Chronos brings a mechanic I've not seen before. Every time you die, your character ages by a single year, and this has numerous positive and negative effects on your character. For one, you'll start out as a scrawny 18-year-old, and after a couple of deaths and you begin to reach the prime of your life, you'll become a stronger physical person. Juxtaposed to this progression though, is the fact that as you pass your prime, your character begins to lose muscle mass and strength, and in turn becomes more wise and adept with magical abilities, which is, in my opinion, a really clever and good idea. And it also mitigates some of the frustration that traditionally comes with dying with no real reward. The crystals that you'll find dotted around the world act as save points, and you can fast travel between them once they've been unlocked. What you can't do is rest up and restore your orbs, which are used to heal your character. But Chronos takes a slightly different approach to allowing the player to tactically prolong their life, and that's through the leveling system. You'll level up your character very often, and upon reaching a new level, your health bar fully recharges. This means there'll often be a balancing act knowing that you're about to hit level but with a low health bar, and trying to make the decision whether it's worth going into that fight without using that health orb up, which you won't be able to restore. None of this would be worthwhile, however, if the combat wasn't up to scratch. In traditional style, you'll have a lock-on mechanic, you'll be able to circle strafe, as well as quickly dodge roll out of the way. There's a parry move using the left trigger, and you'll have a light and heavy attack, as well as the ability to hold down the heavy attack to do even more damage. With weapons being split into two categories, strength and dexterity, and each new weapon you find will have an affinity based on one of those two characteristics, meaning that the more you have in that area, for example strength, that will be times by the affinity of the weapon, let's say 1.6, and that will give you extra damage in that area. It's certainly beneficial to min-max either strength or dexterity based on the type of player and the type of weapons you prefer. I personally went for a giant hammer, which obviously is strength. The final aspect of combat are the arcane magics that you can use. By timing perfect parries, counters and dodges, you'll charge this up and eventually be able to unleash it with the push of a button. Early skills make your player much faster, more dexterous, and able to deal far more damage for a short period of time, while latter ones give you a shield protecting you from all damage. While I really enjoy the combat in the game, it's certainly a tad too slow at times. While you do get used to it, it's not until you use that special skill which increases your speed that you realise perhaps they should have opted for slightly faster movement. The rest of the game is very similar to Demon's Souls, with slow progression through a stage, careful planning of how you're going to use your potions and abilities to get there, and then the blessed relief when you open up a shortcut which takes you back to that start crystal. You're free to roam forward and backwards and move between the different areas at your leisure, but beneath that there's actually more of a linear game here than meets the eye. There are a few puzzles in the game requiring you to find certain items, or you can combine two items together to create something new. At certain landmark ages your character will gain new traits and abilities, but there's always the chance you'll stay forever young if you manage manage not to die. Trying to make that dream not a reality are numerous boss fights, with the early part of the game seeing you trying to take down 3 large bosses. And there were some surprisingly clever little twists within these fights, like one where you become gigantic in order to fight them. Godzilla style, with pillars and columns shattering as you battle. Character movement and control does feel a little clunky when just navigating the world. There are some notable omissions, things like sliding down a ladder or quick turning, and as we'll discuss in the next section, the visuals and performance have a few issues as well, which may frustrate some players. As far as its gameplay goes though, Chronos Before the Ashes is surprisingly good. It feels tough without being frustrating, and there's a clear goal and reason to everything you're doing, with the aging mechanic keeping it interesting when you do eventually perish. I give gameplay 17 out of 20, but the controls, they're not quite as good. I give those 15 out of 20. In a frustrating move, the developers have decided to leave the frame rate entirely uncapped, and it's a game where it fluctuates quite wildly at times. For the most part, as you can see in this frame rate footage, it's between 40 and 60 FPS. However, that is certainly not always the case. There are areas later in the game, particularly when you move out into the larger environments, where the frame rate tanks down to 20, and when you're switching between 40 and 20, it's very noticeable. The game also hasn't had a single patch since launch. It's still on version 1.0, and it would really benefit from just a little bit of TLC, because you'll notice vegetation popping in when you turn around, items in the world which will flicker in and out of existence, and they're always scenery items. The core geometry is intact and running smoothly and it looks good, but these other aspects detract from what would otherwise be a really potentially quite pretty game. It's not running at native resolution, it's slightly below that, and the handheld performance equally suffers when you're in those later areas of the game. Earlier areas and some of the indoor spaces are absolutely fine and feel quite smooth, but it does need a touch of work. As far as the audio goes, the soundscape is generally ambient sounds, and I guess the best way to describe it is macabre. You'll hear whale song in some areas, which just shouldn't work, but it lends itself perfectly to that unnerving atmosphere. Enemy designs are all okay. There's not a huge amount of variety in this regard until you begin to progress to the later areas. The main protagonist will visibly age as you go on, and it upsets me that after 10 hours of play I've still not hit my own age. Ay caramba. The best aspect of the world design is the pacing, as you'll find the crystals just at the right time, and the shortcuts just when you've run out of all lives, you've got a sliver of health left, and you know that by opening that shortcut you've actually made a massive amount of progression. Visuals and performance then, not quite up to snuff in some areas. As it stands, they're just okay. They score 13 out of 20. The soundtrack and audio are excellent for the most part, and I'm a big fan of understated ambient soundtracks. That scores 18 out of 20. In terms of value then, Chronos is going to set you back £26.64 or your regional equivalent, but thankfully it's available physically and usually for much cheaper than this. But if you are downloading, it has a very reasonable size of 2.8 gigs and can be completed in around 10 hours. But there are a surprising number of hidden items and areas to find, which will potentially prolong this for a little bit longer. With all that said, I think £26.64 is too expensive. They need to go back and patch this one up, but if you find it on sale then it's most certainly a pickup. If you've blasted your way through all the Dark Souls games and you're looking for something that has a fresh take on that genre, I think you will enjoy this one. Overall, I give value 15 out of 20. Overall then, while Chronos Before the Ashes has its flaws, I think it's a really enjoyable game, and one that despite some clunkiness, I've still really enjoyed playing. The developer really do need to go back though and just do a bit of work in terms of the visuals and performance. It scores a SwitchUp score of 78%. Thanks to all of you that watch the channel, that enjoy the content that Glen and I put out, and keep your eyes peeled because we're working on a few big videos that I'm pretty sure you're going to really enjoy. Thanks to our patrons and all the new ones, again. It's crazy. I don't know how you guys are doing it, to be honest, and we really do appreciate it, but thanks for all those new people. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!